Hello, Classic Crew, and welcome to today's video, where we're going to be talking about 5 ways to make your long-distance relationship last. I feel like I know a lot about long-distance relationships. I've had 2 in my life. One was 9 months, and one ended up being my husband. So I've done the long-distance relationship thing a couple of times, and I learned a lot of lessons along the way, and I think it's something that I really wanted to share with you guys, because long-distance relationships are not easy. It's dealing with a whole other can of worms that you're not necessarily prepared for, and I think that it can be really difficult to navigate. So I really wanted to talk about some things that I figured out from my first relationship to my second, and things that I really learned and that made it much better for me the second time around. Because the first time I really didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't know what things I should be implementing, things that I should be thinking about. And what ended up happening was that by the end, we had not spent enough time together in person, that by the time we spent a couple of weeks together in person, we just realized we were totally wrong for each other, and it didn't work out. Whereas my second time around, I really knew what to look for, and I really knew how to keep the relationship going and how to make it more realistic for the two of us. Now, I know some people who will not enter long distance relationships, who just say absolutely not. I think that's kind of silly because yes, long distance relationships have their hardships, but if there is someone that you really love or that you really think you have a good rapport with, or you think it could work out, I think it would be silly to give that up just because of distance when we are in the best time in history to be in a long distance relationship. Honestly, you can FaceTime, you can call, you can fly. There are so many ways to make a long distance relationship work. Now, do I think that there should be long distance relationships that last years and years and years and years and years on end? No. I think that long distance relationships you do them when they're necessary and with the intention that you will be in the same place at the end of that. So I don't think that long distance relationships as a permanent thing is a good idea, but doing it while you guys are trying to figure out if you're right for each other and if you really care about that person, I think that that is A-okay in my book. So today I'm going to share 5 tips that I used while I was dating long distance and that ended up with me marrying my husband. So let's get into it. Number 1 is don't text. Guys, I just hate texting for dating anyways. Texting in relationships and dating is like poison. It never works out. There's nothing that is useful about it. When you're texting in a relationship, you feel like, oh, it's great. We're constantly connected. We can talk to each other anytime we want. It has the potential to go wrong in so many ways. Anything can be misread over text. You do not have the body language to explain what's going on between you. You do not have the tone of voice to explain if it's sarcastic or if it's serious. You really have no context for what the other person is saying, and everything can be misread and lead to an unnecessary fight. Just don't do it. It's not worth it. Jacob and I, very early on in our long distance relationship, and our entire relationship was long distance, to be clear. So it wasn't like we dated for a little while and then we were long distance. No, we were long distance the entire time. Jacob and I agreed very early on that we were not going to text because it could lead to those arguments. And also, it would get frustrating if one of us was trying to text the other person all day and the other person was busy and wanted to live their life, and then you resented them for being busy. The other person does not owe you a text at every moment of the day to have their phone next to them all the time. And if you hold them to that standard, you will get frustrated and you will get resentful. And it's something that is difficult to comprehend because you're like, oh, most people have their phones next to them all day. But people have their phones next to them for work reasons. People may have their phones next to them, but they don't necessarily want to have to respond to every text you send at every moment because it means that you're constantly tethered away from what you're actually experiencing in the moment. And it's just not necessary and it's not good for the relationship. So I highly recommend not texting all the time. Now, if you need to text to schedule a time to call, that's different, but just texting consistently all the time throughout your day, it's just a recipe for disaster. And in long distance relationships, especially when you're not going to get an opportunity to see that person later to explain things, it's just a bad plan. So do not recommend texting in a long distance relationship. I also want to mention that I think a lot of the time when people do long distance dating, they think that every time they get on the phone or get on FaceTime, they have to have like a deep and meaningful conversation. But a lot of dating when you're in the same city is doing stuff together. So you're not necessarily talking to each other. You might just be enjoying one another's company while you're watching a movie or while you're at the zoo. And it's not necessarily a really deep conversation. Whereas in long distance, it can feel like every time you talk to each other, it has to be a very long, serious conversation in a good way, not a bad serious, but just where it has to be in depth. And I think that that is not natural for couples. It's just not. When you're married, definitely not. You don't have a deep and meaningful conversation every single night of the week. So I think it's important in a long distance relationship to delineate what those date nights are gonna look like. If you guys, let's say, talk every night, make sure that only 2 nights of the week, maybe, you guys are having a date night where you're really talking and getting in depth with each other. And then the other 5 nights a week or 6 nights a week, you guys are just kind of being more casual, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a long, intense conversation, because that's just too much pressure to put on any relationship. It just doesn't, no one has that much going on in their life that they're gonna be able to have a deep and meaningful conversation every single night. My second piece of advice is to see each other for a couple long stretches of time. This was something I did not do in my first relationship, my first long distance relationship, and it was a mistake, and it taught me a very, very good lesson. So the lesson that I learned is that early on in your relationship, maybe within a month or 2, spend a week or 2, if you can, together uninterrupted. Because this isn't a situation where maybe you met and you're long distance. It's not something necessarily where you guys were together for a while and now you're doing long distance. This is more a situation where you meet and immediately are long distance. So in that situation, when that happens, you're not necessarily gonna know how you guys work together, how things look in a normal situation. And going off phone calls or FaceTime solely alone, that is just not real. And it's not real life. Now, it's not to say that you can't learn a lot about the other person through FaceTime and through those calls, and that it's not a great thing. And I think that it's actually, in a lot of ways, very nice because you don't have to deal with the distraction of the physicality of things because you guys aren't in the same place, so you don't have to worry. But it isn't entirely natural, and you guys aren't sharing experiences. You're not seeing how the other person lives their life. You're not seeing what their day-to-day looks like. And so spending 2 weeks together uninterrupted will really teach you if you guys could make it work if you were living in the same city, and not just does this work over long distance. So doing that early on is really important, and then a little bit later on, kind of checking again and doing that for 2 weeks or a month that second time. So for Jacob and me, we spent a full 2 weeks together very early on in our relationship, and then we spent a full month together. And those were incredibly important for me because it really taught me that Jacob and I had a great rapport and we could hang out and we were compatible and we had chemistry. And it was stuff that over FaceTime and phone calls, I really liked him and I really liked our dynamic, but I couldn't tell you for sure that we really could make it work. Whereas in that first relationship, over FaceTime and long distance, we were fine. We were great. We were together for 9 months, but 2 weeks in person, and all of a sudden we realized that it just didn't work at all. So I think it's really important early on, if you're getting to know someone over long distance, spending that amount of time together just to make sure that things are on the right track. Number 3 is, if you can, see each other frequently, even if you're long distance. So this is, I think, what made the long distance a lot easier for me and Jacob. We saw each other every other weekend. I would go down to visit him in Charlottesville, Virginia, or he would visit me in New York. And we would really make an effort, even though it was not easy to get to one another. It was a long train ride for me and a long drive up for him. The two of us would see each other every other weekend because we knew it was important to spend as much time together in person as we possibly could. Now, I know for some people, it's just too difficult. You can't make it work. You're too far. It's too expensive. If you can, anytime you can, take advantage of seeing that person in person. Going way too long without seeing each other, it really does mess with the dynamic. It's just unnatural to be in a relationship where you're barely seeing each other, because that's not how real relationships work. So making sure that if you have an opportunity to see each other, you take advantage of it, and you really do make an effort as often as possible to see one another in person, because that's what your relationship is going to be more similar to, is the times where you are in each other's vicinity. So you want to make sure that that is as common as possible because it will make a difference in your dynamic and in your relationship. Number 4 is don't make every single time you visit each other a vacation day. Sometimes treat it like a normal day. So it's very difficult when you're not seeing each other that often to not treat it like we're gonna go out and do fun things. Because doing fun things is great and it's really fun and it makes every time that you visit each other seem exciting, but that isn't gonna be what your normal day-to-day is like, and it's not accurate to how your relationship may look. So I think it's really important when you do visit each other not to treat every single time like that. Not to treat it like every time we see each other, we're gonna do something really fun and do a bunch of dinners or whatever, but trying to treat a weekend like it would be if you lived in town. So spending more time at his apartment, going grocery shopping, maybe doing some cleaning together, and just kind of seeing what the vibe is on a natural weekend or on a normal weekend, as opposed to, oh, it's a vacation and we're seeing each other and we get to celebrate that with each other. No, trying to see each other really in your natural habitat, in a sense, so that you can see how does that work? How do we get along? It's not just, oh, party time with the couple that never gets to see each other. It's we treat each other like we're in a relationship, and relationships are not always being able to go do something that's fun. Sometimes it's really just hanging around the house and taking care of chores and errands. So I think it's really important to do that, and it will help inform you about how the relationship works. Number 5 is hang out with people, not just each other, when you see each other. I think it's very easy to get sucked into, when you're in a long distance relationship, that it's really just the two of you because you're not seeing other people. You're not going out to dinner even. You're FaceTiming alone all the time. And then when you go see each other, you want to spend as much time as possible with one another. But the fact of the matter is, it's really important for you guys to see how you interact around other people, how you interact around family, how you interact around friends, and seeing how your dynamic shifts around other people, but also seeing the people that your partner hangs out with and how he acts and how you guys get along in bigger groups. This kind of stuff is very informative, and it's really helpful in a long distance relationship to tell you how things are gonna look when you're not long distance. Because when you're not long distance, you're probably going to be seeing people on a more regular basis. So if you want to see people on a more regular basis, it's definitely important that you see how that would look when you guys are not long distance from each other. And I think that's really important for the future of a relationship. So when Jacob and I were dating and I visited him, I would hang out with his friends maybe every other time I visited, just to kind of get the feel of, first of all, who he hung out with and who his friends were, but also what his dynamic was with them and what our dynamic was. And it gave me a lot of information that I wanted. And when he visited me, we would hang out with my friends, and it gave him information about who I was hanging out with and what I was like around them and what he was like around my friends. And it was just a really important part of the long distance thing. So when you're dating long distance, I think it's really important to keep some of these things in mind, because it isn't the same as dating someone who's just right around the corner from you. It is a little bit different, and you want to make sure that you are still giving yourselves the best chance to have a great relationship. So let me know in the comments if you guys have any tips and tricks for long distance relationships. If you've been in one, if you are in one, I'd love to hear. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. We'd love to have you join the Classic crew. Hit that notification bell to get notified of all my new videos. I'd love if you would subscribe to my newsletter. It's just a little dose of Classic that comes into your inbox about twice a month. If you'd like to follow me on social media, it's @ClassicallyAbby, absolutely everywhere. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.